Hello and welcome to the call. My name is John Thomas with Humanities Team. As we continue our day-long celebration of Global Oneness Day, it's my pleasure to moderate our next panel, The Conscious Business Revolution. This should be a powerful and provocative discussion, so please stay tuned. I'll be speaking with Ken Wilber, Marilyn Tam, Elizabeth Satoris, Chris Laszlo, and Frederick Lalo, 5 remarkable leaders and with their inspiring perspectives on this whole topic of conscious business. In this panel, you'll hear about key principles and practices that can help change agents and leaders reinvent their organizations. You'll also hear a little bit about the Conscious Business Declaration and Humanities Team business initiatives that recognize the interconnectedness of all life. I will introduce our panel guest in just a moment, but first I want to acknowledge all of you listening in, our audience, the thousands of you who are participating during this live summit and are on the ground in programs or community events around the world. This is our 7th year celebrating Global Oneness Day, and we've grown our numbers every year. During this period I mentioned, we've had over 200,000 have registered to participate in this program. So thank you, each of you, for helping Global Oneness Day become our Earth Day for an awakened humanity. As a reminder, if you've missed any of the sessions today, you can enjoy free replays for all of these sessions. We post them within 24 hours on our webpage, and we leave them up for a 48-hour period. But even better, if you purchase one of the Global Oneness Day 2016 upgrade packages, you won't have to take notes. You'll have copies of all of these panels and discussions. You can enjoy them at any time, share them with others. And for a limited time, there's a $100 discount on these packages. So to learn more about this, visit the globalonenesssummit.org website and select the upgrade button that's up at the top of the page. Before we begin our conversation, let me briefly tell you about our 5 panelists. They have detailed bios on the website, but in the interest of time, I will shorten some of these bios, but you can see the full bios there on the Conscious Business Revolution webpage. First, Ken Wilber is one of the most important philosophers in the world today. He's the most widely translated academic writer in America, with 25 books translated into some 30 foreign languages. Ken is the founder of Integral Institute, as well as the co-founder of Integral Life. What makes Ken Wilber especially relevant in today's world is that he is the originator of arguably the first truly comprehensive or integrative philosophy, aptly named integral theory. As Ken himself puts it, I'd like to think of it as one of the first believable world philosophies. It incorporating cultural studies, anthropology, systems theory, developmental psychology, biology, and spirituality. It has been applied to many diverse fields, including ecology, sustainability, psychotherapy and psychiatry, education, medicine, politics, sports, art, and most relevant for our conversation today, business. Marilyn Tam, PhD, is a speaker, author, consultant, board-certified executive leadership coach, and founder of the executive director of US Foundation, formerly the CEO of Aveda Corporation, president of a Reebok apparel and retail group, and vice president of Nike, Inc. Marilyn is also a successful entrepreneur who has developed and built 4 companies. From being a child laborer in Hong Kong to international business and humanitarian success, she is an inspiring example of what can be achieved if one follows their dreams. With her talks, books, workshops, and consultations, she has helped thousands of people internationally to achieve greater success and happiness during these dynamic times. Brand Channel lists her as one of the 4 most prominent names in ethical business globally. Next, Dr. Elizabeth Satoris is an evolution biologist, futurist, professor, speaker, author, and sustainability consultant who has lived in 5 countries while also lecturing and doing workshops and media appearances across the globe. Elizabeth received her BFA from Syracuse University, an MS from Indiana University, and a PhD from Dalhousie University in Canada. She has taught at numerous prestigious institutions and universities. She's been a science writer for the Nova Horizon TV series, a UN consultant on indigenous peoples, a consultant to the Chinese National Science Organization, and is a fellow of the World Business Academy and advisor to ethical markets. Elizabeth is currently professor in residence at Chaminade University, Honolulu, Hawaii, where she's dialing in from today. She is recognized and honored in many other accomplishments described in her bio, and I encourage you all to read these bios. Next, Chris Laszlo, PhD, is the Chuck Fowler Professor of Business as an Agent for World Benefit at Case Western University's Weatherford School of Management, and serves as the Faculty Executive Director for the Fowler Center. He is the author of Flourishing for Enterprise in 2014, Embedded Sustainability in 2011, Sustainable Value in 2008, and The Sustainable Company in 2003. His work over the last decade has helped launch mainstream management approaches to sustainability and value for profit. In 2012, he was selected as top 100 thought leader in trustworthy business behavior by Trust America. In 2015, he was elected fellow at the International Academy of Management. It has been a pleasure to work with Chris also, as he's one of the key collaborators to help create the Conscious Business Declaration, which we'll come back to shortly. Next, last but not least, is Frederic Laloux, who is a former associate partner at McKinsey & Company. He holds an MBA from INSEAD and a degree in coaching from Newfield Network in Boulder, Colorado. He's traveled widely. He speaks 5 languages fluently. Frederic advises corporate leaders who feel called to explore fundamental new ways of organizing. And his work draws on his deep understanding of the inner workings of organizations and his long-standing fascination with the topic of human development. All of this informed by his personal journey of spiritual growth. His book, Reinventing Organizations, an amazing book, has been described as groundbreaking and a leap in management thinking by respected scholars in the field of human development and management. His book focuses on how there is a currently emerging new form of consciousness is bringing forth a radically more soulful, purposeful, and productive management paradigm. So, deeply honored to have all 5 of you here and to be moderating this panel. I'm extremely excited about this. Now, this is a panel that has been a regular part of Global Oneness Day for, I think, the last 4 years. And I'm excited to moderate the panel again. Chris Laszlo, thank you for participating again. You were on the panel last year. And Ken, Marilyn, Elizabeth, and Frederic, thank you for joining this for the first time at this discussion. To set the stage a little bit more before going into our questions, I just want to, just for us all, kind of reflect on what a year it has been from where we were last year at Global Oneness Day. At the summit last year, we made some exciting announcements. We announced the Conscious Business Declaration, a new standard for business in the 21st century. This declaration it was launched and went live in February. It was created by Humanities Team with Club of Budapest, Royal Peace Foundation, and the Fowler Center as an agent for world benefit. And we'll say a little bit more about the declaration because it's very germane to what we're talking about today. Last year, we also announced Conscious a conscious business training and certification program, which Humanities team did launch this year in May. It trains business leaders on and change agents on how to put these principles of the Conscious Business Declaration into action. And we just launched our second training again in September. Now, I know we're all anxious to get into the questions and have the discussion, but I'd like to just read a few of the comments or principles out of this declaration because it's squarely aligned with our conversation, and we can refer to it. And I would invite the listeners who are here today listening in, either now or later, go to consciousbusinessdeclaration.org. That's all one word. You can see the declaration, read it, and encourage you to sign it. And as we talk today, just take in and reflect, what would it mean for the world and for each of us personally to go on this journey that is invited by the principles of the Declaration. And just to read a few of these points from the Declaration. The Conscious Business Declaration, a new standard for business in the 21st century. And it begins, as a global community of business leaders, we are committed to developing the awareness and skills needed to consciously evolve our organizations in alignment with these principles. And there's 7 principles. I'll read just a few. The first is we are one with humanity and all of life. Business and all institutions of the human community are integral parts of a single reality, interrelated, interconnected, and interdependent. And another principle, the third one, business must go beyond sustainability in the philosophy of do no harm to restoring the self-renewing integrity of the earth. And the last principle in this declaration, when aligned with oneness, business is the most powerful engine on earth for creating prosperity and flourishing for all. And there are other principles that deal with the role of business for creating prosperity, transparency, communities, maximizing human potential, and so forth. But I think what is clear is from the work of all of the panelists is we all embrace these principles. And with this in mind, I'd really love to just now start with the first question and open this up. And I'd like to ask each of you to open with why you're drawn to be on this panel. You know, what excites you about this conversation, about the vision of business embracing this paradigm of oneness. And just invite each of you to share. Why are you here in this conversation? Any of you feel moved to start? Marilyn, maybe if you'd like to begin. Or perhaps Chris, someone like to begin the conversation?
Sure. Marilyn, were you fiddling with your mute button like I often do?
Yes.
Okay. Go right ahead, Marilyn. I'll go after you.
Thank you. I was really drawn to this panel because this is honestly how we live, how I live. Growing up in Hong Kong and as a child laborer, walking to the factory, going by the river, which changed color every day based on what fabric colors were being dyed that day. I understood very quickly, very young, that there was a connection between us and the environment. And then, of course, growing up and becoming a business leader on the other side of the equation, placing production back where I used to grow up, where I was doing work. I really got the understanding in a very physical, intangible way, both physically, spiritually, and emotionally, what it means about oneness. So my success in business, my success in life, my own spiritual connection with the universe and beyond is coming from this understanding of oneness. So this is how I live. This is how the world can only survive and thrive with this understanding.
Beautiful. Thank you. Chris, I think you were ready to share.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sean. Yes. So I think what draws me in particular is the challenge of how to transform our consciousness so that we see ourselves as one with humanity and all life, as it's stated so elegantly in the first principle. We have this opportunity to stop seeing ourselves as separate from one another and separate from nature, interested only in maximizing our own gain, which seems to have been the dominant paradigm for the last many hundred years, and instead start acting as if we are deeply connected to one another in this reality that Marilyn just mentioned. And this opportunity is not to see ourselves as connected and in a oneness paradigm, not just metaphorically, but in the science-based terms of energy and information fields that connect and unite us. And I know that Ken and Elizabeth and Frederick and many of you have written about this for a long while, Ken, in your case, for decades. And what excites me is that now we're, I think, moving more in a more concerted way to focus on how to make it happen in business. So I'll just say that at the Fowler Center, we are researching the role of daily practices and positive routines that can be integrated into the workplace so that business people can experientially increase their awareness of how their attitudes and actions impact all life on Earth. And we're doing this. This is a Sino-U.S. jointly funded multi-year effort where we're able to interview businesses around the world and have a book project already contracted with Stanford University Press that will be coming out in a few years on this topic. Anyway, I'll stop here, but it's this work with the principles on an engaging business so that we can help business people change who they're being and not only what they're doing. That excites me.
Thank you, Marilyn and Chris. Both very inspiring reasons for being here and the background that you've come from. Very inspiring. And just to open it up here, to the rest of the panel, what brought you here today? Elizabeth, Ken, and Frederick.
Okay. I'm ready to go, John. This is Elizabeth in Honolulu. Aloha to you all. There are two things that came together for me that drew me to this panel. One is that when I was trained as a scientist, we still studied the philosophy of science, and we're aware that science, that you can't make a theory in a vacuum. You have to have some idea of what a universe is, for example, to make theories about it. And so I was aware that Western science is based on a particular set of what's called axioms formally in science that are a worldview amounting to a meaningless, purposeless universe that's material, energy was brought in later, and it's running down by entropy, a rather depressing story. And then biology taught that life was a temporary uphill struggle against the tide, but would eventually be washed away. So worse yet, life wasn't even going to succeed in the long run. But then quantum theory came along, and the quantum theorists all had a very different fundamental worldview because that one didn't work for them when they went down through the atom and into the world of energy. They turned to the Vedic science of the East primarily, and all publicly acknowledged that they were operating in a universe that was fundamentally consciousness in which matter forms. So diametrically opposite basic worldviews. And I was drawn to the second one, to the one where it's the oneness kind of worldview. And then looking at my evolution biology in that context, I saw that cooperation was at least, if not more, important than competition in nature. So that the Darwinian aspect of nature seemed to me the youthful mode of expansion and all the resources you can get and take it, elbow others out of the way, what's called actually a type 1 pioneer ecosystem by ecologists, and that there was a learning curve, a maturation curve that had a kind of tipping point when fighting your enemies became more expensive than feeding them would be. And so you moved into the cooperative mode, which was more consistent with the oneness worldview. So that's, in the smallest nutshell I can put it, how I began to see evolution and biology and the business world that took its cues only from the Darwinian theory and a very superficial version of it at that. So we got a dog-eat-dog world in the world of business, in our world economy, and now we're trying to shift away from that. So I'm working in an MBA program here at Chaminade where we are transforming the whole program from one in which young people go into business in order to compete and rise in the corporate ladder and make a living, and ever better one, hopefully, and switching that to the ancient Hawaiian values of aloha, of kuleana, of your responsibility as a business person to yourself, your family, your aina, your land, your community. So that, again, is consistent with the values of oneness that the Declaration is about.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Yes, and it's inspiring to hear those thoughts being and orientation being brought into business schools, and hopefully we can come back to that more as we get into the panel. Very good. Thank you so much. And Frederick or Ken, any thoughts? What drew you to this panel?
Hi, this is Frederick. In my case, I think a big part comes from my personal story for a number of years of actually feeling the pain of separation in organizations. Now, at the time, I didn't have the words for that. Outwardly, you would have felt that I was very happy at my work, and that's kind of how I felt, that I was successful. But there was always a sense of there's got to be more. This can't be it. There was always a sense that, business as we're doing it, isn't really serious. We're all somehow playing, at this game of success, and we're all, creating this artificial distance with one another, and there's this whole hierarchy thing that messes up relationships, and there was always this sense that we weren't actually talking about what's most essential to our experience of being human. And I mean, if you just take the word oneness, it's a word that in the business context is never used, just as most of the most important words are never used. We never talk about love, or we never talk about connection, or we never talk about care. And so this was way before I started on my path of, before I even knew that there was something like a path of personal growth or spiritual growth. But I had this sense of separation, of emptiness. And I still have the sense today, and still, walking into most businesses, I immediately have a sense of pain. It's a subtle pain, this pain of separation. These sort of cold lobbies in most corporations. The glass and the marble that's supposed to show how successful and magnificent these businesses are, but that mostly signal that this isn't a place where we can really relax, where we can really be ourselves, where we can really talk about what's most essential to the human experience. And so I think that pain is still a pain I sense when I go into businesses. And of course, with that pain of separation from one another comes in also, I think, the separation from the natural world, from the natural realm. And it's only because we're already separated sort of from our coworkers and our bosses and our subordinates that we separate ourselves from nature, and that we can accept the harm that business is doing in nature, because we're doing dreadful things to the planet, and business is really the vehicle that does most of that harm. And I'm just so interested and curious about what makes that really decent human beings, like most of the people are in businesses, are able to do that, and what prevents them from showing up with what's most meaningful for them. What prevents them from asking the most relevant questions, from entering into the most relevant conversation. And so for me, it's really the other side of oneness, which is this pain of separation that I still feel when I go into organizations that I work with and that I like to talk about. It's often sort of the elephant in the room, and I have a lot of compassion in many ways for business leaders and for CEOs. It's an unfashionable thing to say that you have compassion for CEOs these days, but they, many of them, in what looks a very successful life, are trapped with a real sense of isolation, of loneliness, of not being in touch with what matters most to them. So that's what kind of brings me to this conversation.
Thank you, Frederick. And I can relate from my own journey in the corporate world to much of what you're saying. And Ken?
These have been wonderful responses. I'm really enjoying all of them. I'm also acutely aware of our time constraints here. And since in question number 2, I'm being asked to sort of explain waking up and growing up, I'm going to give my response to this question when I respond to that question, if that's okay.
Okay. That sounds good, Ken. That'd be great. Well, let's we'll move on to the next question, and just want to acknowledge and thank all of these. Motivations are, to me, so woven together in such a beautiful way. Starting from Marilyn, your very palpable, embodied experience of this, even as a child, the cost of separation and what it's doing to the environment and so forth. And going through each of you, Chris, the perspective you're bringing about the need to transform consciousness is foundational, and that's such a part of what we're here today about and naming in the Declaration. And Elizabeth naming this different paradigm from the West to the East, and how bringing in cooperation and the lens of biology and science, which you so beautifully do as we look at business. And Frederick, again, all that you mentioned there, and that what exists today in culture, and the palpable experience of separation that so many people feel. So this is a beautiful, foundation to the conversation. And Ken, to your point, one of the things that I wanted to go next to this next question that we talked about is you were really instrumental in providing feedback to those who are forming the Conscious Business Declaration, and really made it really poignant and clear that if we just sign the Declaration and do nothing more, that it's just a symbolic gesture. It would be an expression of the awakening to this principle of oneness being recognized. But the real work is not just in the waking up, but in the growing up, being on this journey to fully commit to, as we say in the Declaration, that first statement, is commit to developing the awareness, the skills needed to consciously evolve our organizations in alignment with these principles. And that was a powerful contribution when we heard that really we added that statement at the beginning of the Declaration.
Right.
So I just would invite you, Ken, just to come in and say more about this and why is it so essential.
Certainly, and thank you. Thank you very much. And it's a big topic. I promise I'll try and make this as fast as I can, maybe 9 or 10 minutes. But there's been a massive amount of worldwide research over the last 2 or 3 decades into the types of growth and development that humans have available to them. And the short story is that we've discovered at least 2 absolutely central but quite different types of growth and development. And these are what we're referring to as waking up and growing up. So waking up is a growth process that humans have known about for thousands of years. going back at least probably 50,000 years to the earliest shamans and their vision quests. And it is a process found in virtually all of the world's great wisdom traditions, where the result of waking up is known by many names: enlightenment, awakening, satori, metamorphosis, moksha, emancipation, the great liberation. This is a state of pure oneness, or pure non-duality, where the individual's identity expands from a skin-encapsulated ego to an ultimate unity consciousness, or a oneness with the ground of all being and the entire universe, what the Sufis call the supreme identity. And the supreme identity is the pure oneness at the core of virtually all the world's great wisdom traditions. And again, going back some 50,000 years or so around the world. But the second major growth process, that of growing up, is a very recent discovery. In fact, it's not much more than about 100 years old. And for this reason, not a single spiritual system anywhere in the world has any knowledge of the stages of this path of growing up. And this lack of awareness invades and infects all the paths of waking up and ends up creating some severe problems with the traditional notions of enlightenment or awakening or oneness. And the major problem is that while they fully cover the stages of waking up, they're almost totally ignorant of the stages of growing up. And this badly slants their overall results, making them in a certain sense limited and partial and fragment, producing a oneness that isn't actually fully one or truly whole. And then when these practices, from mindfulness, contemplative prayer, to yoga, to meditation, or any practices aimed at a state of conscious oneness, whether they're spiritual or based on a new science, when these are used to generate the oneness that we speak of in business, then what happens is that those problems and limitations get transferred into its use in business as well, often with very unfortunate results. Now, virtually all of the great wisdom traditions have produced maps of the path of waking up, with each tradition outlining what it's found are the most central and major stages in the overall process of waking up. We see things from 7 mansions of St. Teresa of Avila to the 10 Zen Oxfording pictures, 6 or 7 major stages of contemplative Christianity, the 10 Sephirot of Jewish Kabbalah, major levels of Yogacara Buddhism, and so on. And these are all stages that represent direct, immediate, first-person experiences. If you have an experience of being one with the entire universe in love and bliss, you definitely know that. But the stages of growing up are not like that at all. Rather, they're more like the rules of grammar. Everybody who grows up in a particular language-speaking culture ends up speaking that language fairly correctly. They put subjects and verbs together correctly, they use adjectives and adverbs correctly, and in general they follow the rules of grammar of that language quite correctly. But if you ask any of them to write down those rules, virtually nobody can do it. In other words, they're all following some very extensive systems of rules, but they have no idea they're doing so, let alone what those rules are. Further, those rules cannot be seen by introspection or by looking within. You can look within right now, and you'll never see these grammar rules. This is why you can't see them by meditating either. But there turn out to be anywhere from around 6 to 8 major stages of growth in each of our multiple intelligences, including cognitive intelligence, emotional intelligence, moral intelligence, and spiritual intelligence. And each of these intelligences or lines go through these 6 to 8 major levels. And all of these levels or stages are like grammar. They actually govern how we interpret and therefore experience our world. And each stage has its own grammar, its own hidden map that determines how the world looks from each of these 6 to 8 major stages. And the discovery over the past 100 years or so of these major stages of growing up is one of the most significant discoveries about human beings in all of our history. And I'll give a very quick summary of these stages of growing up in just a moment so you can see what's actually involved here. But these growing up stages represent how wide, how encompassing, how extensive consciousness is at each of its growth stages, with each higher stage adding a new and greater perspective through which all experiences are viewed, including all spiritual experiences. So the point here is that the same experience of a pure oneness will actually be interpreted and experienced differently by individuals at different stages of the overall maturation or growing up process. So how you experience waking up depends in many ways on where you are in growing up. And that's the radical new discovery of the past few decades. Now, since most people are not aware of any growing up stages at all, let me give a very simple example to show what's involved and why it's important. Carol Gilligan, a feminist icon whose book In a Different Voice introduced the notion that men and women reason differently, but they both move through the same basic stages of growing up. And Gilligan researched, in particular, the process of growing up in females, and especially in the line of moral intelligence. And she found 4 major stages that all women go through as they morally mature. And these 4 stages are just a shorthand version of the standard 6 to 8 stages that most models present. But they're accurate as far as they go, and their simplicity makes them a good introduction, so that's what we use. So her first stage she calls selfish. The woman cares only for herself. It's very narcissistic. And I also call this first stage egocentric, self-centered. Stage 2 she calls care, because the woman extends care from just herself to entire groups, but only those chosen groups. So there's a very strong us versus them attitude at this stage, and therefore it often identifies with very prejudice and bias factors. So this stage is racist or sexist or homophobic or xenophobic and so on. And this is a stage I also call ethnocentric, group-centered. Her next higher stage, stage 3, she calls universal care, because the woman now extends care to all groups, to all humans, regardless of race, color, sex, or creed, which I also call world-centric, all humans centered. And her final stage, stage 4, she calls integrated, since the woman integrates both masculine and feminine qualities at this stage. And I call this integral or cosmocentric. So egocentric to ethnocentric to world-centric to integral. The 4 fundamental stages of growing up in all of our multiple intelligences. So here's what actual research has shown us. These 2 developmental sequences, waking up and growing up, are largely independent. So you can be at any one of those stages of growing up and have an experience of virtually any stage of waking up. This means, for example, that you can actually have a traditionally total enlightenment state experience, a satori or ultimate unity consciousness, and yet still be at an ethnocentric stage of growing up. So you will indeed feel a oneness with your entire world, but your entire world is interpreted with an ethnocentric prejudice. You might still be racist or sexist or homophobic, or think you have the one and only one path that alone is real, or any number of ethnocentric prejudices and bigotries. And there's no way you'll be able to introspect and see this enormous deficiency in your values and views because you can't see the stages of growing up by introspecting. And this uneven development, high in either waking up or growing up, and low in the other, is the rule, not the exception. You can, for example, look at the book Zen at War and see some Zen masters highly regarded for their depth of enlightenment, yet espousing some very ethnocentric views. Or consider when the great paths of liberation themselves were first laid down, around 1,000 to 2,000 years ago. Even though each of them had discovered an enlightened or awakened or oneness state, their cultures were still almost all patriarchal, that is, sexist. They all believed slavery was perfectly acceptable. They were racist, and so on. So their very high waking up states were not enough to cure them of their relatively low growing up development. They had waking up oneness, but it didn't cure them. Didn't cure them then, it won't cure them now. So this is what we mean when we say that we need both growing up and waking up for any truly and authentic oneness state. So we want to include, for example, a state of growing up that reaches into world-centric and integral stages of development. Frederick's book, for example, deals with businesses that are at an integral stage of development. We also want to reach a waking up state of ultimate oneness or ultimate unity consciousness. Both of those are important. And yet in all of history, there's not been a single system anywhere in the world that included both of these paths of development. And that means in all of history, humans were training themselves to be partial, limited, and broken. And by and large, they succeeded. It's not enough to achieve oneness only in waking up, because you can still be very ethnocentric or worse in your growing up. And it's not enough to achieve a oneness or integral perspective only in growing up, because although you'll have a very broad integral awareness, you still have not had a waking up experience, and so you remain ignorant of ultimate reality itself. Both of these developmental sequences, waking up and growing up, need to be embraced and seriously practiced. So be aware of programs that extol only a waking up oneness or only a growing up oneness. Neither alone is really a true oneness, but remains limited, partial, and ultimately broken. So truly integral oneness is what humanity's team has in mind, and I certainly support that wholeheartedly. So thank you for putting up with all of this, and I hope these sort of basic points came across fairly well.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you very much. And I think for us it's a good theme for us to kind of weave into the next questions, because what you're calling forth here is the need for both of these to happen in conscious business and business culture, for businesses to evolve and become conscious business, that leaders need to develop on both dimensions, the awakening and the growing up. Yeah, and that's very powerful what you're bringing in. And I think with that, and that also underscores it's not just a simple matter of signing a declaration and you're done, but you commit to a journey that involves both of those dimensions. I'd like to open up this next question to all of you on the panel. In your own unique ways, each of you have articulated powerful visions for business that embrace the interconnected and interdependent nature of life, or this, what we call this integral level that Ken was just referring to. I'd like to ask, what are, from your perspectives, what are the implications for such conscious business right now at this time on Earth, and in terms of the evolution of humanity at this critical juncture? And it's a pretty open question. I'd invite any of you who feel inspired to jump in. Otherwise, I'd be happy to select one of you. I just want to open this up.
I'm happy. This is Chris. I'm happy just to try to build on what Ken just said. What I find interesting is this idea that if we can get business leaders to both wake up and grow up in the sense that Ken described, and I think that I could say for this whole group that we're all committed to, that change in who they are, not just in how they see the world, but in how they experience what it means to be human and experience ultimate reality, we can assume that changes then for them the very purpose of business. And that ties in, I think, to the second principle, conscious business principle, which is to have a goal where, for business, to create prosperity for all and not just for the owners or the richest 1%, and to contribute to a healthy, restorative environment and not just reduce environmental footprint or do less harm, and to improve human well-being. So this is still something I'm exploring, and I don't want to put it forward as a conclusion, but I do think that there is a growing up and a enlightening of our species that that we can all contribute to. And I think there's a worldwide movement that can have very different ways and is contributing to this transformation in business, and that it's with that kind of transformation in being that we have the best opportunity to really shift the role of business. And just one last thing, I think we may, all of us, not just on this panel, but many in the audience, will know of Donella Meadows' piece that she wrote in 1997 on places to intervene in complex systems. And her number one place to intervene was in transforming the paradigm. The paradigm, and I think that's what we're talking about. So that this waking up and growing up together is the highest point of leverage that we have in any effort to try to transform the institution of business so that it can become an agent of world benefit.
Chris, I greatly appreciate that. This is Elizabeth again, and I'd like to jump in because I'm going to have to leave on the hour for this big International Union of Conservation of Nature meeting going on here in Honolulu. But I loved Ken's description of the differences between waking up and growing up, and of our trying to find this path to growing up in the culture at large. One of the things I've said to very high leaders of multinationals is to point out that Joseph Campbell showed us the very common myth of the Odyssey, basically the hero's journey, but that hero's journey is only about the youthful mode, the mode in which you expand and compete. And when Odysseus gets home to Ithaca, all he does is give his sword to his son to help him bump off the rest of Penelope's suitors, and you never find out how he runs Ithaca now as a wiser man. And yet, in many indigenous cultures that I've worked with, I could sum it up with one Indian grandma who said, anyone who knows how to run a household knows how to run a world. She was talking, the indigenous, often, and I find this in indigenous cultures, the understanding of holarchy without naming it. And Ken and I, of course, both picked up holarchy about the same time, long before we knew each other. These maturation sets of rules, or the spiral dynamics, whatever, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the things that have come into our culture over this past 100 years are all about expansion of your holarchy from self to larger and larger groups up to the whole cosmos. And one of the most successful business trainers I know, I think, is Richard Olivier, the son of Sir Laurence Olivier in London, who calls his organization Olivier Mythodrama, and teaches through the classics where the gods and humans are always interrelated, when it's ancient Greek drama, or in Shakespearean dramas, the business leader or the head of state makes huge mistakes through his decisions and then has to live with consequences and figure out how to work through them. We need this next part of the story that expands our holarchy, and that's what we have to write now, because we humans live by our stories. And as long as we're teaching through all of the economic theory only the youthful Darwinian mode, how do people even know what's possible in the mature mode? So I do a lot of focus with my students on visioning where we want to go, what kind of a community we want to be in the future, what our relationship will be to each other and to our entire world and our cosmos. So I do love seeing that difference more clearly, Ken, thanks to you, between, it's always bothered me that there are so many people who have been enlightened and then behave so badly. You know, the book After the Ecstasy, The Laundry, right? I always thought that was one of the best titles anybody ever came up with. But doing the laundry can be fun, and it's really about changing people's story in the business world, broadening those horizons, showing them that it's cheaper to feed your enemies than kill them, and then we have to figure out how to take the profits out of war, because that's the only thing that keeps us fighting them. We got to get out of juvenile mode, and business has to lead the way, because economics has been promoting this limited Darwinian competition story, and we need to move forward. We weren't allowed to take up Kropotkin, who was the leading evolution biologist in the Soviet Union, because he was in the Soviet Union. But his book is called Mutual Aid, and he shows that the biggest leaps in evolution are through cooperation. And we have now people like David Sloan Wilson giving all the scientific evidence that there's not just individual selection in nature, but group selection. And it's the most cooperative groups that win, and we have to keep expanding that through the holarchy, and we've hit the planetary limits now, so business has to work cooperatively at the global level, not through central command and control, but through distributed networking and awareness in oneness. So I think this is a wonderful panel. We're so on the right track. I'm going to listen in as long as I can to others, and then I'll just have to slip away.
Beautiful. Thank you, Elizabeth. And we all have to end by the top of the hour, so we're on the same schedule here. I just invite in Marilyn. Any would you have anything you'd like to add on this question?
Thank you. I was just nodding my head as all the speakers are speaking, because it's so true. And I have the unique perspective, because now I get to speak to, I'm brought into different corporations, organizations, as well as governments around the world to keynote for big events. And they usually bring me in thinking that I will be talking about whatever they brought me in for, which is usually about, underlying it all is how to make more money. Ultimately, that's what they think that I can offer them because of my background in so many aspects of business. But what I do then is, as all you all said, show them that money alone is not going to bring in what they want. In just looking after money alone is not going to bring in the profits or a thriving, sustainable company that they're looking for. In fact, I worked with, and I bring in statistics, one of which was done by Gallup Research, and we worked with Jim Harder on that in my book, The Happiness Choice, and talking about how actually happiness is really the underlying motivation and driving force to success in business. And I can show them with real numbers, like, for example, the last year that we have completely accurate statistics is 2013, where we can show that for that year, $550 billion, as in a B, was lost in business in the United States alone due to lack of well-being and unhappiness in the workforce. So these are numbers that make business people wake up and listen. And then, to paraphrase, so they are going to be more awake when they hear that, because it addresses what they think is their motivation. So I show them money is only one of 5 aspects of life. Money, and then we talk about body, relationships, spirituality, and community. So those come together to show how what we're talking about here is really integral to business success, because now there's really no place left to conquer. I mean, they can't export their problem to some, quote, undeveloped world, because every place is so integrated now, and everyone is so integrated, and everything is so integrated that the deniers really don't have any place to go. So I can go from that aspect and bring people to realize that, truthfully, we are one. We are one. I mean, it's not a joke. It's not a nice slogan. It is physical reality in all aspects of life. So it's been a very exciting and interesting journey. And also, what I found out in doing this is that we really have to address people where they are. We cannot come in with theories we have to show them from practical levels from wherever they are. And in many cases, many businesses are not where any one of us on this panel are. That means that they understand about the integral nature of oneness. They may only still be looking at one aspect of their survival, which is usually money. And if we start with there and walk them through the steps, as Ken was talking about, it doesn't take that long, because I don't get that much time with these people, but we can walk them through quite quickly. Thank you for everything you brought in here, Marilyn. And sort of, for me, it brings up the next question I was hoping to ask, and this especially where you're bringing in this innate draw to happiness and how business, by missing that, the levels of engagement are so low and the cost in billions of dollars to business. It's really key. And I wanted to ask one more question, and we're running tight on time. I was wondering if Frederick, you would mind leading this response, and if we have time to pull in others. But I would say, one thing is that many skeptics that hear these conscious business principles, the declaration, and believe that businesses wouldn't be able to compete or generate adequate profit if we go down this, sort of path to oneness. But many companies are breaking away, Unilever and Kingfisher and the B corporations and many others, to suggest that there is a tremendous business opportunity in these conscious business principles. So I'd like to ask, given the many challenges of business at this time, does conscious business make good business sense? And Frederick, I would, thinking of your book, I'd love to invite you to start with this.
I'm always a bit wary about this question because it's often a way to try to dress up the bride. Is talk about things in a way that we feel will be acceptable in traditional business circles, which are still often looking at the world very much from this perspective of simply more profit. Let's optimize our way to more market share and profit, and this whole modern, scientific, materialistic, Darwinian worldview. And while it's true that you have some organizations that look at the world from a totally different perspective and are hugely successful with it, and you named a few, and I researched some that are just out of this world successful. They never went at it with the hope to be successful. I mean, that wasn't their primary driver, because from this more this grown-up view, there is of course much more to the world than simply making profit. And so I'm always a bit wary when you say that just embrace these principles and they make good business sense too, because people will be more happy, will be more engaged. All that is true, but I don't think anyone will embrace these sort of these radical new principles if they just simply come at it from a traditional modern perspective of making more money. Because the truth is, while some parts of the world, the business world will flourish, if we really go for this world of oneness, there's whole parts of the economy that will need to collapse. And this is something that people don't like to talk about, but I think is very real. If you are the CEO of BASF or Syngenta or Monsanto, and you're living off pesticides and fertilizers, we all know that agriculture, when you move to this other perspective, this interrelated perspective, that brings out a whole new form of agriculture, permaculture and all the likes. Suddenly you don't need pesticides and fertilizers. And so, as the world moves to sort of the next stage, there will be whole parts of our economy that will need to collapse, or that will just naturally collapse. If you just look at the whole world of marketing and advertising, that basically works on the principles in pretty much all of consumer products of, you will finally be happy and whole when you buy our product. Right? All of that is creating false needs that at some point, if you're operating from a perspective of oneness, will have to fall away.
Frederick, Thank you. We're going to have to end here. We've run out of time. I want to thank you, and I want to thank the entire panel for what has been a very engaging conversation. For our audience, be sure not to miss the keynote interview with Doreen Virtue that's coming up next, hosted by Steve Farrell. Doreen Virtue is the author of over 50 books, an international workshop leader who has taught thousands of people worldwide. This is one you won't want to miss. We're going to end now with a 10-second oneness moment beginning right now.